Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. This episode is to celebrate, to acknowledge, I don't know, what do we say? Valentine's Day. Not sure what it's going to look like for you this year. I'm recording this in January, so I have no idea what has happened in the world. We're 2 days before the inauguration. Who knows? I wanted to be mindful about Valentine's Day, and I ran into Keeley, who's a professional cuddler. She's a cuddle therapist on TikTok, and I just loved her content so much. And you're not going to hear this part in the episode, but after we stopped recording, we started to talk about the importance of touch. And as a licensed clinical social worker, as therapists, we can't touch our clients. It's just ethically very, very sticky. And there is a need, especially when there's trauma, there's childhood emotional neglect. Healing can be so powerful. And I always feel concerned to say something. As therapists, we can do as much as we can do, and doing somatic experiencing, doing body work, doing healing work that is with the body, in the body, can really be helpful. And it's a limitation. So ideally, therapists would have cuddle therapists that they could refer to so that the two could collaborate. This episode is really not about that. It's about why Keeley became a professional cuddler, what her experience is. What I love is she really is so clear about her boundaries and creating safety and talking about expectations with her clients. And we talk about, what does cuddling look like? Where do you cuddle? How do you cuddle? What happens if somebody gets a little bit aroused? It's all done very tastefully. There's nothing that's graphic in this episode, but these are questions that I think would come up for most people if you're listening to talk about cuddling. I think it's an amazing episode. And because this is coming out for Valentine's Day, I know many people are not with partners. They're separated from their partners. They are widowed. They've lost people. And we are craving touch. We're not hugging people. We're not shaking hands. I asked Keeley if she could provide some exercises. If you have a partner, if you're alone, what you can do. It's a 3-minute exercise. So if touch is very difficult for you, I just think she gives some really practical suggestions. And it's towards the end of the interview that we kind of wrap up with this stuff. But I wanted to think about COVID has been pretty hard for many of us, and many of us are craving touch. And even this morning, I had a talk with my husband that COVID has really made me into a germaphobe, and we used to hold hands in public all the time. And having the background of working in a hospital and working for home health, I'm very clear about what protocol is for keeping things germ-free. And my husband is just not that way. And so to be honest with you, we kind of stopped holding hands in public because basically we go out and go grocery shopping and we come home. So even touch in my family has gotten much more limited. I've talked to you about COVID has just really made me very contractive. I'm hoping that is going to be changing. Everybody deals with it differently. I'm just sharing to be transparent. But even this morning, we were talking about how can we incorporate more touch back into our relationship and to have that closeness and connection. And I think it really can be very, very important. And in this episode, if you don't have a partner, Keeley talks about how we can still give ourselves touch and to stimulate those touch receptors, which release oxytocin. If you're a new listener to the podcast, I have a closed Facebook group called Unapologetically Sensitive. I have an open Facebook page also called Unapologetically Sensitive. I'm on social media. If you're curious to know more about where you can find me and where I post information, you can either look in the show notes or you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. Let me tell you a little bit about Keeley. Keeley Shoup is a certified cuddle therapist based in Chicago. She's also a certified cuddle party facilitator and a boundaries and consent educator. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. If you're on TikTok, she also has a YouTube channel. I think you're really going to enjoy her content. And now, on to the show. Hey, Keeley, welcome. I'm excited to talk to you about this today. This is something very new, and I found you on TikTok. The first question I always ask my guests is, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do identify as a highly sensitive person. I will admit that I don't know an abundance about Hsp. It's something I have recently become aware of and been exposed to. So when you reached out to be on this podcast, I was very excited. Hopefully I'll learn some things today. But yes, from what I understand, I am an Hsp.
So let me do a quick review in case there are any new listeners. It's highly sensitive person, or sensory processing sensitivity, is a term that was coined by Dr. Elaine Aron back in the 90s. And she has 4 core characteristics that spell the acronym DOES or DOES. So D is depth of processing. We're deep thinkers. We process things. Negatively, we may have been told that we ruminate. We can't let things go. I really like to put it in the positive, but I think that this is really one of the primary characteristics of being an Hsp. We may leave a situation and wonder, did I say too much? How did that go? We look for the meaning in life. Having that depth in our life and meaning is really, really important to us. And I think when people hear sensitive, they think of someone who's emotional and dysregulated, and it really doesn't describe what we are. The O is for overarousal or overstimulation, and that's probably the hardest part of the trait because we notice so much, because we have a finely tuned nervous system. We get overaroused and overstimulated very easily. And Ariana Smith gave me this great analogy. It's like our bathtubs fill up very quickly, and then when we pull the drain, they drain really, really slowly. So being really mindful about what is overstimulating for us, having downtime, taking time to rest, and really creating a lifestyle so that our bathtubs don't fill up early in the day, so that we're kind of a little challenged. The E is for emotional responsiveness or empathy. We have more active mirror neurons, so we feel things very deeply. We are very impacted by emotional things. We typically don't like being startled. We don't like things that are gory or bloody, watching animals or people get hurt, because it hurts our tender hearts. But we tend to be the emotional glue that holds relationships together, because we are so caring, and that ability to see multiple perspectives. And the last one, S, is for sensitive to subtleties. So we may notice changes in barometric pressure. We may notice the sound of a clock ticking. We're more sensitive to medication, caffeine. Some people have perfect pitch. I certainly do not. And then things like bright lights, loud noises, we are impacted by those things so much more than other people. But, we tend to be really loyal, conscientious, very creative. We tend to be the poets, the teachers, the healers, the justice makers. This year has been really hard because we tend to be the ones that are very good at predicting and anticipating and being very prepared. We come up with solutions that are outside of the box, and watching things unfold in what feels like a very chaotic and unjust way has been very difficult for many of us in our tender hearts.
Man, all those relate. All those definitely are relatable.
Yeah, it's a little bit more than just being emotional, which the name just does not do it justice. No disrespect to Dr. Aron.
Yeah, for me, when I hear emotional, I hear kind of how that's been weaponized against people who are socialized as female a lot. So that's the immediate response that I conjure. Hopefully I can shift that, as time goes on.
Sure. And the trait equally affects men and women. Absolutely. I don't have any research on how that affects people that are non-binary, transgender, people that are gender fluid, but it's equal. And I think that we think that it's more women than men. And I think it's much harder for men because you don't want to be a sensitive female, and you certainly don't want to be labeled as a sensitive, emotional guy.
That is something I see a lot in my work. The majority of my clients are men. I've got lots of wonderful women and non-binary clients, but the vast majority of people who come to me for cuddle therapy are men, and it's one of the only places in their world, in their entire universe, where they are allowed to be sensitive without judgment or reproach.
Interesting. So let's take a step back. You are a professional cuddler. So can you tell us what that is and how you got interested in it?
Yeah, cuddle therapist, professional cuddler is a modality. It's a healing modality. The easiest way I can describe it, it's the marriage of using tools from like counseling or traditional talk therapy and incorporating things in the body. So a massage therapist. Whereas a massage therapist does a whole lot more technical work. They're really focused on the biology of how your muscles are put together, where your fascia, how do you manipulate fascia, the connective tissue. We try to meet how your mind talks to your body, how that impacts your emotional and mental health regulation. Anyone who is in the therapeutic fields, talk therapy, counseling, LCPC kind of a thing, they might have heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. That is a really good sort of mental handbook for a lot of what cuddle therapists do.
And for those of you, if you haven't heard it, it's Bessel van der Kolk, and I will put it in the show notes at Unapologetically Sensitive. The book is called The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent, excellent book. So what I do is give people access to platonic touch, and it is key that it is platonic in this sense. And we do that by getting education and getting conversation around boundaries and consent. That's the only way to safely access that platonic touch. So you really can't have the touch without the other. So when you hear cuddle therapy, I don't think people realize the kind of education work that's required around boundaries and consent with clients so that we can do any of that work.
I love that. And how did you become interested in it?
That is such it's a long story, so I will try to briefly touch on it. I didn't know what it was until I graduated college, moved to Chicago, and then was exposed to it here through a random happenstance. So I had always grown up with a proclivity to psychology. I took, advanced classes in high school and got like early college credit in high school from taking psychology classes because I was so fascinated by it and into it. I was in therapy since a young age, and it did wonders for me. So I really connected to that. But whenever I thought about career paths in my life, that never matched up perfectly. There was always a big gap for me because there's really strict guidelines about how, when, and whether you can touch clients. And I grew up in a family where touch was exceedingly healing. All my family is in the medical profession. My mom started in the neonatal intensive care unit. So she was in the NICU, and then about mid in my life, she transferred to hospice care. So I went from cuddling the firstborn baby of the new year as a tradition in our family and feeling how healing that was and how much touch was life-giving to infants. And without touch, it is fatal for them, to seeing patients who are terminally restless. And if you've seen anyone with terminal restlessness, it is an incredibly heartbreaking thing to watch and experience, especially for an HSP, for someone who's highly sensitive. But the simple act of gently placing a hand over another hand, witnessing that and being a part of that as I volunteered with my mother, calming someone in terminal restlessness, just the example that she set of healing people through touch, that was so core and essential to me. That's why I always personally had a bit of a disconnect with talk therapy in terms of doing it. I value receiving it. I value that it exists so much. But in terms of making it like a career or really my life's purpose, this feels like my life's purpose, cuddle therapy. So I took classes, I gained education for myself just out of interest. But I ended up getting a degree in, my degree is in Japanese theater and telecommunications. Let's not go into that. with a minor in French. So yeah, none of those things am I actively using in a monetary capacity. But after I moved to Chicago through a series of really difficult traumatic events and whatnot, I found Cuddle Parties, which is an actual trademarked name and organization. And through that, I found professional cuddling and cuddle therapy. And it changed my entire life. And so I devoted my life to it because of how much it changed mine.
So I want to talk about what cuddling actually looks like when you do it. But I also want to talk about training. But the part of me that's more interested in what does it look like? And then I want to drop back into something more practical.
Sure, absolutely. It looks so different than what I think people imagine, but it can also look exactly like what people imagine. So I'll just explain a little bit further. When I see clients, a typical session, we've already had a consultation discussing why they're looking into this, what they want to get out of it, and we've created a care plan based on their needs and wants. And we've also confirmed that what I can offer is in line with what they're looking for. There are definitely clients who I recommend other other practices. I recommend other avenues for getting what they need if it's more appropriate and really what they want. I don't want anyone coming into my place and being disappointed, because I don't shift what I do for clients. I'm going to do the thing that I do really well and give that gift to the people who need it. So what that can look like is after the consultation, they come in, we have a glass of water, sit down and do a quick check-in. We go over some boundaries and consent communication. And then based on our care plan, we then do a couple exercises to transition into touch. And based on the care plan, that looks really different. For example, someone with trauma around touch, we may not ever cuddle in a session for weeks and weeks and weeks, depending on what they need. What they might need more of is reassurance and autonomy over their body. So knowing that the opportunity is there, but no one will touch their body until they say and specifically how they want it to be touched. And that could be fingertip to fingertip as we sit across from each other. But we'll do activities like there's a game called Come Here, Go Away. And you stand facing each other, standing up facing each other. And one person is the instructor. And so they'll, with their hands or verbally say, go away, and do a push away motion with their hands. And the other person will take a few slow steps back until the person says stop. And then we'll just evaluate what's going on in our body. Does that distance feel comfortable or not? Or you can say, come here, and do a come motion with your hands. And the other person will take a few steps slowly forward until the person says stop. There's no touching involved in that, but you're really getting a whole lot of sensory input in your body. What do those things feel like? Where is your threshold for comfort, that personal bubble people talk about? That's one thing that we can do, an exercise we can do. It's really great for trauma because it has little touch involved. There's some people who are on the autism spectrum. So what that looks like is we control the environment a lot so that sensory input is at a low. I will not have anything that smells strong in the room. The lights will probably be dimmed. There might be either soft fabric or really like neutral fabric, depending on what that client experiences in their body. There might be no sound or very, very low sound, so that when we do maybe put a hand on a hand or whatnot, that is accessible to that person. There are people who are very touch starved and very lonely, whether they have a high demanding, high stress job, and they need to feel really relaxed and comfortable. And that's where a lot of the full body cuddling and contact, a position called the mama bear, where typically I, as the practitioner, am sitting upright, legs wide, back supported, and then the client sits right in front of me. We're facing the same direction, and they're leaning back on me like kind of a lazy boy chair, right? And that way I can wrap my hands around them so they're fully enveloped and kind of secure, and their whole body is connected and touched someone so that they can really get a whole lot of oxytocin release in their brain. Or we can be like kind of entangled in a really comfy, cozy position. I've got people who want to come and watch movies. There's some people who want to take naps. There's people who want to really dive deeply into their emotional lives, and I'll practice deep listening with them. I've gone on for quite some time describing all these different scenarios, and there's infinite more. I've had people who wanted to work on aggression work, and so we had a pillow fight. We had a pillow fight so that they can access aggression or some of those feelings of anger that were way too uncomfortable for them to acknowledge in a way that felt fun or silly, so that they could kind of backdoor into releasing those emotions. Yeah, so those are just some examples. Anything that you can think of that marries what emotionally might support someone with how they can physically be touched, we try to find access to that meeting point.
I love that. So there are a couple things that are going on in my mind. One, when you talk about the exercises, standing with asking somebody to motion with your hands to come closer, to back off. That's great for attachment also, which again is in the body, that we want people to have that consent and to choose how does it feel when people come close and move away, and does that activate any attachment issues? The other thing for the listener is take a moment right now and drop into your body and notice what is going on in your body. And it's so interesting that when you started talking, I'm aware of having so much tension in my back. And it's so fascinating to me how, I can have this stream of consciousness going on behind the scenes. I'm listening to you, but I'm thinking, I really miss getting massages. It's been a really long time and I really need a massage and I really miss that. So this is kind of an opportunity to notice what is going on. And for those of you that don't like being touched, are your arms crossed? Are you kind of checking out? Have you, obviously, if you stop listening to the episode, you're not going to hear this. This is all good information about where we're at around touch. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but with the pandemic and all of the isolation, many of us are really missing that sense of closeness and hugging friends and having family around. And if you live alone, that you're missing that sense of connection. And Keeley's going to talk about some ways that we can show up for ourselves, because this has really been a hard year and touch is so important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There are ways that we can regulate even when we're by ourselves. One of the things that makes cuddle therapy so powerful is the process of co-regulation. That is a really in-depth thing that anyone who isn't super geeky about it might not be so engaged by a long conversation around that. But what we're doing is we're using those mirror neurons that you mentioned. We're using the other person's body, mine as the practitioner, my body, to be a model for how to regulate your own nervous system. Our nervous systems want to sync to the people around us. They are trying to sync to the people around us. So that's one of the biggest benefits of having in-person sessions, is that co-regulation, that feeling someone's slow heartbeat, feeling someone's deep breaths, feeling someone's relaxed muscles, so that your body can then say, oh, this is what I can do. This is how I can be. And there are ways to access that when we're by ourselves. They just take some creative tips and techniques.
Yeah. For many HSPs, just co-regulating emotionally, aside from physically, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But so many of us did not have parents or caregivers that were okay with our big feels. So we were told to get over it, to not worry so much, don't be so dramatic, don't be so intense. So many of us don't know how to sit with our own feelings. And we really, kids look to their parents or caregivers to go, it's okay. I know you're really worried. Let's do this. Let's do that. Come sit on my lap. What can we do? That our parents ideally co-regulate with us. And so many of us grow up and don't know how to do that. And that's a big part of what happens in therapy or in relationships. And then this is a whole other aspect where physically we can learn to co-regulate, and it can just be so healing for us.
Mm-hmm. I get asked a lot on my TikTok quite often, do people cry? Is it okay to cry? This video made me cry. Does that make me weird? And it really reminds me of what you're talking about in so many sessions. One of the most powerful and healing things that happens is that someone can come in, get relaxed enough and kind of validated enough to cry for a good portion of the session. And it doesn't surprise me, but it is always a reminder of how many times people say, I'm sorry I'm crying, or try to apologize to me because they think they're burdening me or bothering me, or that it is somehow like making my time negative. And there is nothing more important to me. There's nothing more fulfilling and validating to me than you being able to feel whatever you're feeling for as long as you need to feel it with me as a support system. It doesn't dysregulate me, right? Like, that is a really powerful experience for a lot of people.
Well, I think so many of us have told to stop crying and to get over it. And I can't tell you how often in the Hsp online course that I teach that people will cry or clients will cry. And it's like, we celebrate tears here. It's okay. Mm-hmm. And my massage therapist knows that I often will go in and I'm probably going to have a cry today. That it's so easy, as in tune as I'd like to believe that I am. Often I'm carrying things. Again, like I was saying, how that thought about the massage was running in the background. It's not a conscious thought. Mm-hmm. And I'll lay down on the table and finally I'm slowing down, and then just lots of grief and sadness or whatever comes up, and I just have a good cry. And then by the time I'm done, I just have the sense of just release. And for many of us that are deep feelers, crying really ends up releasing a lot of tension and gives us that sense of like,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Not just highly sensitive people, but also very much so for people who are highly sensitive. The act of navigating the world takes a lot of strength. It takes quite a bit of fortification. And all of that takes a lot of energy, and we store that stress and tension in our bodies a lot. And simply the act of letting that down of not having to be so armored, that can just release from the body in the form of tears.
Yeah.
It is such a natural process of like just getting access to sort of this oasis of calm and of less of threat of danger, because that's what it feels like the world is a lot of the time.
Right. I have so many questions I want to ask you. So just ask one at a time. If someone is interested in being a professional cuddler, how do you become a professional cuddler?
That's an excellent question. I recommend a good amount of training. The industry of professional cuddling or cuddle therapy is currently not regulated. So anyone who wants to can find a few websites where they will simply list you. And I don't recommend that. I recommend a whole lot of education personally before you get started so that you're prepared to really serve your clients in a way, and you're prepared to protect yourself and your emotions and set healthy boundaries for yourself in a way that's going to actually sustain you in this work. Because this work can be exceedingly draining if you don't have some systems in place or haven't been given some instruction about how to take care of yourself around it. So there are a few training programs I highly recommend. The three I'll mention very quickly are Cuddlist, Cuddlist, Cuddlist.com. There's one called Cuddle Sanctuary. That's based out of Los Angeles. Cuddle Sanctuary. And there is one called Certified Cuddlers. That's based out of Portland, Oregon. Certified Cuddlers. I have taken all those courses. I recommend them. They're all, in my estimation, extremely affordable, especially when you compare it to a college degree, right? They're exceedingly affordable compared to any kind of college education. And they do a very comprehensive job of preparing someone for this work. So I would say get a little training first. And then I have a series on this on my TikTok. So if anyone wants a whole lot of in-depth information, go there. Or I also offer mentorships to people if they want a mentor in getting started. But because, again, there isn't a degree to get in this field, you have to be really self-starting. You have to have a whole lot of personal drive in finding the information and creating your own curriculum in doing this work. So if there's a drive, if there's an interest and a curiosity, do it. You just go and find some information and learn as much as you can about it and then get started.
Yeah. And before COVID, when you were seeing clients in person, where would you meet with clients?
I meet with clients. I had a home practice, so I have a space in my home, a clinic in my home. I also will see people without calls. Out calls just have different regulations, and there's like a travel fee involved. So either they come to my space or I go to their space. Or if we need a neutral third-party space, we can create that, whether it's hotels are okay, but we can also go to a beach. We can also go to like a public park or something. There's lots of places that are accessible to even do this kind of work. It's really great.
It's so interesting to observe my process, because my first thought was like, ooh, people know where you live. Isn't that scary? And then I thought, oh, I had a home office where I saw therapy clients in my home. And I'm laughing at that part where we can have very fearful thinking and we kind of forget to do the reality check. And just as you've talked about, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is I did a really thorough screening. I was very mindful about who I brought to my home. I never had any issues, and it really ended up being fine. And so I want to name this process that we tend to have that fearful thought. And there are things that we can do to really ensure our safety.
Mm-hmm. That's it's a conversation that I get asked about quite a lot, is safety. I've got big thoughts on this, so I'll try to limit my ramblings about this a bit. But safety for so many people is a bit more about perception than it is about like numbers assessing risk, right? The appearance or the feeling of safety and comfort is often, in my experience, way more important than the actual risk of the situation, because most of the time the actual risk of the situation is one, uncontrollable, and two, relatively low. I put it like this with some people is you go to the movie theater, right? That is a space where anyone has access to you in a darkly lit room where you're enclosed in a space. You don't do background checks for the people who you're in a movie theater with, right? And how many people go to the movie theater often? And do you feel relatively safe in a movie theater? So the access that air quotes dangerous person has to you is really high. Anyone can go in there. You could be sitting next to someone who is potentially extremely dangerous, but your feeling of safety is still pretty high. There's things that mitigate it, like being in public or being with people that you care about or whatnot. And that's what screening calls and whatnot are. It's just mitigating the risk that there's always inherent risk in life. So that's my little soapbox about it, and I'll stop off. But there are definitely practical things that you can do. If you want me to give some tips about how to create safety, I can. But I think the most important takeaway from me is that when I'm working with clients, I think people perceive human beings to be scarier than what I experience them to be one-on-one. I think even a person who has the potential to escalate into maybe a dangerous situation, when you've screened them, when you are authentic and vulnerable with them, when you give them a safe place to be authentic and vulnerable with you, I see the best in human beings every day when I work. I really do. And I think that I know because of the stories that they told me, some of the clients I've seen have the capacity to harm because they've told me about how they've harmed. And in creating a space for them that is restorative and healing, and that has, this is key, I have exceedingly strong boundaries, demonstrative communication skills around that, a no tolerance policy for disrespect. And I communicate that exceedingly clearly. So when you couple a environment of unconditional love and acceptance with really healthy boundaries, people show up in beautiful, amazing ways.
Totally agree with you. And again, I'm going to comment on what I'm aware of is going on in my body. This is just fast. I love this part of mindfulness. My heart's beating a little bit high. And it's almost like that programming of strangers are dangerous. Don't bring people into your home. And then the few times that you see that there's been domestic violence, then one of the partners ends up returning to the home to cause harm. Mm-hmm. Because of the way that our brains are wired and that we tend to be much more cautious. If we had a difficult childhood, we have a higher rate of anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. Many of us have experienced trauma, whether it's little t trauma or big trauma. Right now, just notice what's going on in your body. And is there a part of you, because there's a part of me that was like calling BS as you were talking, which is a trauma response. And I totally agree with what you're saying, because I had people into my home. I have very intimate, healthy relationships with my clients. And there's this part of me that's having this reaction. And so if you're having that right now, you might want to put your hand on your heart, take a couple of deep breaths. Is this about something that happened that you're getting activated for that has nothing to do with now? Is this that part of your brain that just is really good at anticipating and preparing? Do you feel safe in your relationships? Are you able to use your intuition to know that something feels creepy or yucky? Do you need help with boundary work? That if you're getting activated, I did not even anticipate this possibly coming up before we started our interview, but I love taking what could be going on in the moment and really using it as an opportunity to use mindfulness and to know that right now in this moment, I'm assuming, unless something crazy is going on where you're listening, you are safe, that you are safe right now. And how can you get yourself back to feeling regulated?
Thank you. I love that. I love that presence. And that's so real. It is so real that there's even moments right before I let a client come into my home where my heart beats and I have that response, and like thoughts will flash through my head. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. And those responses are absolutely learned, and they're protective. That's the reason why we've survived. It's the reason why we've been able to survive the world and evolved. And so they're important things to notice and recognize in your body. And when we pay attention to them and stop and key into them, then we can really find some deep things about ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the way that you screen clients? I'm not talking like nuts and bolts, but I've heard you talk about boundaries and you're so clear in it. And really, we often feel so afraid to set boundaries thinking that they're going to be like walls, but it creates so much safety, because if I'm really clear about this is okay, this is not okay, then you know what you can come up against. And it's not that you have to figure out, is there a landmine? Are you going to get angry? I think boundaries, if we look at them differently, really create incredible amounts of safety for us.
I'm happy to go into that, into screening. And the thing that comes up for me that's so alive for me in this moment that's popping in my head is I think people would be shocked at how many cis men come into my space. And when I set really clear boundaries, they thank me profusely. They are so grateful that they know exactly what they can and can't do, because a lot of times in their life, they're expected to know and they don't know how to navigate that. And they're terrified of violating people's boundaries. They're terrified of being like accused and whatnot. So the amount of times that I get like thanked for setting those is just, it felt very alive for me to say. So screening, we go into a lot of time. People think that cuddle therapy or professional cuddling is a smokescreen for sex work. And so we go into that. I try to just really verbally call that out and say, I don't want you to be misled. What I'm saying I do is at absolute face value, and I want you to take my words as I say them and not as an implication of anything else. I say things like, I want you to come here for the purposes, not settling for platonic touch. So that's sort of how we do that. And I say, I'll give you resources for how to access some more validation and nurturing and fulfillment with sexual intimacy if you need those resources. But I don't want you coming here looking for that, because you will be wasting money and time that's really important, and your time and money are invaluable. So that's one way. Mm-hmm. I set some sort of boundary, and sometimes they're arbitrary with every single client, and I see how they react.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like?
Certainly. Texting. I don't utilize texting as conversation with clients. Clients are permitted to text me if it is a very quick question or if it's logistics related. If they need directions, if they are having trouble finding something, certainly text me. That'll be the quickest response. But if someone tries to text me to chat, once I've set that boundary, that's a big red flag. Additional boundaries is I won't see someone same day. I need at least 24 hours and a consultation before I see someone. And some people are in somewhat of a crisis, especially if they're in touch starvation or touch deprivation, skin hunger. And the desire for it will feel very immediate. But I know someone is probably not going to be able to be regulated enough to be respectful of my boundaries if they can't wait 24 hours for it. So that's another boundary that I'll set. Little things like that.
Totally makes sense. And what I am thinking from my perspective is that when we have that need to connect, but we haven't had our needs met, we don't know, like, okay, so I'm coming to you for cuddle therapy, but that doesn't mean that I can get my emotional needs met outside by texting. And so you set that really clear boundary. Or like you said, somebody not being able to self-regulate and feeling like I need that now because I need you to help me regulate. And you going like, you're going to have some distress tolerance because that's the type of client that I need to work with. And I can see how it would be really confusing for someone who just doesn't know, like they just want that connection and they don't know, is it physical? Is it emotional? So the fact that you're very clear about it really makes it helpful for the person to know, like, we can go here and we're not going to go here.
Yeah. And I think it's also unfair for the clients if I agree to those things that I'm not really prepared to give. If they need crisis counseling or crisis intervention because they're in that need, I'm not the person to go to. I do not have the training to properly address their needs, and I need to give them the resources. I'm happy to give them the resources for someone who will actually be able to help them in that moment. Mm-hmm. I am responsible for their well-being, even if they think I am a part of their well-being in that moment, and I really wouldn't be. How do they, they don't know that. They don't have that information, the in-depth information about what I am and am not trained in, right? Mm-hmm. So I still have to look out for their well-being, and that well-being might be with a different practitioner.
Yeah. What I see in my work, and it's usually related to having adult children of emotionally immature parents or childhood emotional neglect, where it's really hard. And I struggle with this, knowing that it's okay to have wants and needs, asking for my wants and needs to get met. And I find in relationships, my close relationships, something will happen and I'll ask for something and then I get it. And then I feel like some guilt and shame, like, oh, I shouldn't be getting it. And I can talk about it. It's manageable. I'm imagining that also comes up with touch, of wanting that touch and then getting it, and then having kind of a push pull around wanting it, getting it, having some guilt or shame come up. Do you see that happening?
So as a practitioner, getting things from my clients.
That's what clients struggle with, of wanting that touch and then getting it, and then having some discomfort around getting their needs met. Yes,
absolutely. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah. It's an unfamiliar feeling for a lot of those people. Just that, like, satisfaction and fulfillment is unfamiliar. And I don't know how to put, like, where to put that or where to put those feelings. And then I see a lot that shame comes up is, I'm paying for this. There's a lot of, okay, now I have my needs fulfilled and this feels really good. But they are sort of quick to invalidate it because it didn't, like, quote unquote, come organically in their perception. I see that happen a lot. And there's just kind of a reframe around that I offer. It's like, if you're diabetic and you have to get insulin elsewhere, you don't need to be ashamed that your body doesn't make that insulin, right? It's okay to get it where you need it.
Yeah. Well, and I see it akin to the therapeutic relationship. I see a parallel with both of them, that we need to have people that help us to get our needs met. They're just needs. Mm-hmm. And we get them met, and then we learn how to meet some of those ourselves and how to communicate and navigate. And then we may build up the skills so that we get some of those needs met outside of the therapeutic relationship, outside of having a professional cuddler. That's part of what the process is, because we often don't get those things, or we don't have what we need in the relationship. So it's a little bit different, I would think, from a cuddling perspective, because you just may not have anybody that you can get that physical touch from. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think that with a lot of my clients, we work on, how do you find that? How do you develop a relationship with someone in their life where you can incorporate touch? How would that feel comfortable and accessible? And normally, with a little bit of work on, like, how clients are creating relationships, what is going on for them in their body when that happens, where is their access to touch, if there is, even if it's, in unlikely places. Once we kind of examine their lives, a lot of the time there's ways that we can build towards them creating relationship with people that incorporate touch. Not necessarily sexual, again, in nature, but how can you, with a friend, be comfortable enough to say, can we have a hug? You're my friend. I trust you. I care about you. And what I need right now is a hug. Are you willing to do that? Some people won't do that with even their close friends.
Yeah.
So trying to find ways of accessing that. And it also is true that if some of my clients are not in a place where a relationship can happen, and the amount of touch that they want and need, whether it's their love language or whatnot, is going to be higher than what they can access. So how do you access me or other professionals to supplement that while you're also building relationships?
Sure. So because my content is rated G, we have to be very mindful about our language. So I'm thinking I want to have the awkward conversation with you. And how about we use the word excited or arousal, just to keep this G rated. So how do you address that if you have clients that do get aroused while you're cuddling?
Absolutely. The arousal question happens all the time. And it is really important to address it without any shame. That is one of the most important things. It's also really important to say that when people are experiencing skin hunger, touch deprivation, and are in that really dysregulated place, arousal is often involuntary. It is not within their sympathetic nervous system will do what it's going to do. And what I often tell my clients is that, one, that's okay. It can happen. The distinction that's really important is our choices and behaviors that come from that. We're not going to encourage further arousal. We're not going to stimulate anything. None of that will happen. We're going to take no action to progress any of it. It can simply exist, and we're going to take some deep breaths. If what we're doing at that moment is too stimulating just because of sensory input, then we'll adjust slightly so that it's a little bit less stimulus and kind of recenter, re-regulate a little bit. And normally it dissipates and we can continue without shame, without any distress, to a really wonderful, fulfilling session that stays more in a platonic intimacy space.
I love that. Yeah, I was scrolling on TikTok when you were talking about that, and I just was like, yeah. And what I love about that is the same thing with emotions. It's okay to have whatever feelings come up. It just, we don't have to act on them. We don't have to wish them away, but what is, and there's a way to work with it.
I say something repeatedly in my individual sessions and also my group work, and that's all emotions are created equal. All emotions are created equal. You can get angry. You can't hit anybody. You can get aroused. You can't do anything with anybody.
Right.
You can cry. You can't make it someone else's, like, you are the reason I am sad in this moment,
Right.
Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit more into what can people do if they are isolated, if they're alone, if they have partners that are not touchers. What are some ways that we can really show up for ourselves in a way that's reassuring and comforting?
There's going to be two things that I think are really valuable. One is, we'll go with the one that if someone has either a partner or has access to another person, right, but touch is not incorporated in their life, one thing I want them to try is, and this won't work for everyone, but it has a high success rate, is with your partner, set up a time limit of, say, 3 minutes. 3 minutes is typically long enough to receive some benefit out of it, but it's not long enough for the other person to feel like, oh my gosh, this is such a burdensome commitment. And pick one very specific touch. Like, would you be willing to, for 3 minutes, and set a timer literally physically on your phone, wherever, set an actual timer, don't just eyeball it, and say, will you scratch my head for 5 minutes or for 3 minutes? Or will you put your hand on my cheek? Just rest your hand on my cheek softly for 3 minutes. Make the key elements here are make a time limit that feels accessible. You can negotiate the time limit if you want to start asking for more or less to what their comfort level is. Make the action very specific and start with a fairly low risk request. If you start that, do those 3 things, I think people will be surprised at how willing the other person is to accommodate that, because what you've done is create a very clear expectation so they know exactly what they're saying yes to. I think a lot of the time when we're in a relationship with people and the touch kind of drifts or there's a lot of disconnect, people aren't sure when they say yes what they're saying yes to, if that means a whole lot more that is being uncommunicated, right? So that can really help. The second thing I'll mention for people who don't have access to anyone else, take a timer again and set aside, schedule it in a planner, make an appointment with yourself, keep yourself in some way accountable to holding this time that you set, and find a video on YouTube, find my TikTok, find some resources that lead you in some kind of way of touching yourself, whether it's gently stroking your face with your fingertips, whether it's scratching your own head, whether it's giving yourself, like wrapping your arms around yourself and just sitting in a self-hug for a few minutes. The reason why finding the visual of this is important is that if you can stimulate touch receptors in your skin by activating touch on yourself, but you're watching someone else do it too, you can trick your body into activating those mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons of indirect pleasure sensors will fire, and you can produce oxytocin. And it's easier to do that when you see someone else doing it.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Are there any other things? I'm looking at the fact that I didn't manage time very well because I had so many things I wanted to ask you. Are there some other tips that you can have for people? I think we're going to use this as a Valentine's Day addition of ways that people really can show up and be present for themselves if they don't have somebody that, and they don't have a partner, or even if they have somebody who's just not available to them for whatever reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the things that I recommend, especially on Valentine's Day, when so much about romantic love and romantic connection is emphasized, my recommendation is take a little time to think about ways in which you experience love. How do you experience love? What does that feel like for you? When you're thinking about the ways that you've experienced that before, was it in a gift? Was it in time? A resource called The 5 Love Languages could be really, really helpful. It's a book. The author is escaping my mind right now.
It's Gary
Chapman?
I think so. I'll put it in the show notes.
Excellent. Okay. That can be a great resource, but it gets you thinking and inspired on how do you receive love? And once you've identified a way that, oh, when this happens, when someone else does this for me, it feels really good. How can you give that to yourself? It might look different than it might look a little, different, but how can you do that? So often we see on Valentine's Day, people are like, okay, well, get yourself a bottle of wine and get yourself a box of chocolates and put on a sappy movie. And I've done that. I don't have a terrible time, but that isn't always what actually makes me feel loved. Mm-hmm. That is certainly not what always I need. So what I might actually need is to call a dear friend or a family member and have a long conversation that's not necessarily about love, but that makes me feel connected. Mm-hmm. What I might actually need is to make myself go and read a book with some calm, soothing music, even though that's not my favorite activity. It doesn't feel as comforting as a box of chocolates. What I know about myself is that will actually keep me more regulated. Mm-hmm. I might want to buy myself something, if gifts are a really good love language, I might want to buy myself something that I've been really, really wanting and like putting off or don't feel like I deserve right now or unearning. If I can fit it in my budget, I'll switch stuff around, maybe put off one obligation that isn't as time sensitive and do that. Just really take time to figure out how you feel love. How do you experience it?
I love that. Those are great. If you have a pet too, touching a pet just increases oxytocin like crazy. Mm-hmm. So, and if you don't have any, maybe you live in a neighborhood where there are some neighborhood cats or a dog that you can take for a walk. I know with COVID, it makes it a little bit harder. Sometimes the shelters, you can go and walk the dogs. I think that we really do need that touch. And for people that haven't been able to get it, and because of COVID, it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is from this.
One thing this is a little bit of a tangent, and I will try not to make it too long. One thing I've been talking a lot about with my colleagues in this is how, really micro social interactions that we've taken for granted feel foreign for a lot of people. Just like passing someone who is maybe an acquaintance and not a really close friend and having a very general surface level conversation feels very foreign to people. Connecting on really base levels feels very awkward to people, and just reminding yourself that's okay.
Yeah.
Most people are feeling that. We are out of practice. Social interaction is a practice. It is not a learn how to bike ride and always know it kind of a thing.
Well, and there's this level of awareness or hypervigilance if you care about wearing a mask, and are other people wearing a mask, and are they wearing a mask under their nose, or are they taking their mask off to sneeze or cough, that when we have beliefs about what, and this is me, what is safe, that because I've got that level of hypervigilance and hyper awareness, it makes it much harder for me to relax and enjoy people in the way that I did before. And before COVID, I was very social and loved connecting, and it's just taking its a toll on me. It is taking a toll, and I've lived in the same neighborhood for 23 years, and I know my neighbors, and I'm going to keep talking about it. Walking the dog is not the same experience that it was before COVID. It's just not. And it's hard.
Anyone who's lived in a dangerous environment, whether it's trauma or abuse or whatnot, hypervigilance, prolonged hypervigilance is so taxing on the system. It is so taxing. And we are all, for the majority, the vast majority of us are experiencing a level of prolonged hypervigilance around mask wearing, hand washing, distancing. I didn't know at an instance reflex what 6 feet looked like before this. And now it's a measure of distance that I try to be extremely aware of and had to get into my, vocabulary of distances. So
yeah,
hypervigilance can take a toll.
Yeah. On Friday, I got my first shot of the vaccine, and it wasn't until it was a 2.5-hour process because traffic was so backed up. It's a few miles away from my house. And because traffic was so backed up, my appointment was at 3:15. I left the house at 2:30. I got the vaccine at 5. And once I hit the site where they were doing it, went pretty easily. But as soon as I pulled in, I got really teary, and I realized, and I'm feeling it right now, how much stress I've been carrying around because the way my brain works is I know the potential things that could happen. And for those of us that are highly sensitive, we tend to be much more cautious. Our frontal lobe is very well developed. And because my mom lives with us, I don't want anything to happen to her. I've got kids that are in college that live lives that are not as conservative as I would like with COVID. And to just have this thought of there may be a little bit of relaxing for me and what it meant, I was very surprised to see that I had that reaction. And I think that as we see more mitigation of COVID, I think we're going to be having a little bit more of that, just a little bit of relief.
Yeah. Congratulations on getting your vaccine.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. That's exciting. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Keeley, we need to wrap up. Can you tell people a little bit about where to find you, any offerings that you have, and feel free to give out your social media handles. Everything will be in the show notes. But before I was a podcaster, I didn't even know what show notes were. So I just went off what I heard.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. TikTok has been kind of really accessible for a lot of people right now. So at TikTok, you can go to Chicago Cuddle Therapy, or you can search my name. My name is Keeley Shoup, Keeley Shoup, Keeley Shoup. My website is keeleyshoup.com and also chicagocuddletherapy.com. I am on Instagram, Cuddle Keeley. You can check me out there. And I have a YouTube channel. So any of those places are accessible. You can fill out my form and contact me directly. I give one-on-one client sessions right now virtually. And as soon as I get vaccinated, I'll be back to in person. Also, if people are interested in doing this work and getting more information about it, I am happy to have, 30-minute conversations with someone who just wants a little, where do I go next conversation. And then I also offer paid mentorship. So if you want someone to really get you started in this business, let me know and I can help you do that. But yeah, any clients who want to seek me out, and not just me, go to cuddlist.com and see if there's another practitioner nearby. For me, it's more important that this is accessible to people, whoever is doing it, that's reputable, than just me giving that care. So try those things.
Yeah, sounds great. Keeley, thank you so much for being here today. I feel like there's a million more things that I want to talk to you about, and I'm bummed the time is over. But thank you for being here.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Have a great day.
You too.
Hey again. I'm curious to know, what did you think? You think you'd be interested in being a cuddle therapist? Does it feel threatening to have somebody coming into your home? What if you had a designated spot? I mean, I don't have any investment. I just think it's really fascinating. And I do believe that the kind of touch that Keeley's talking about can be so incredibly healing, especially coming out of this year or two. It's going to be really fascinating to see what the research shows once we move beyond this COVID outbreak and once we are politically a little bit more stable. I just think that the effects of what we've been going through are so far reaching. I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to traumatize anybody, but we are all being impacted so seriously. Moving on to brighter things. So we are heading a little bit into springtime. We're still a little bit in wintertime. My hope is that there's a little bit more calm and balance in the world. I want to tell you about a couple of things. The new online Hsp courses will be starting the first week of April. I will be having some episodes coming out April of 2021 if you're listening to this in real time when, I don't know what kind of time it is if you listen to it later, false time. If you're currently listening when the episode is released. The new online Hsp courses will start the week of April 2021. I will have some more episodes coming out with people that have taken the course. They really are transformational, and coming out of this really unusual time. I've had people all over the world take the courses, just having a sense of connection and belonging, being in a group of other people that are wired the same way, learning that we're not alone, hearing other people's experiences in a safe and nurturing environment, incredibly powerful. If you like the term unapologetically sensitive and that resonates for you, I have a merchandise store now with podcast logo. Some of it says podcast, some of it doesn't. You can go to patriciayounglcsw.com. There's a whole merch store there that is amazing. If you're interested in signing up for my newsletter, there is information on my website or in the show notes, and you can stay up to date on what's going on. Sometimes we have discounts on things, and that's a great way to stay in touch. I think that's it. My hope is that everybody is doing well, that if you are struggling, you know that there's support out there. There are plenty of coaches and therapists that can help you if you are struggling. The trait of being highly sensitive is a neutral trait. If you hate your trait, there's probably some wounding there. We all have wounding. We all have some trauma. I don't think anybody gets out of this alive without any wounds, but we don't have to suffer and struggle consistently. My hope is that you're finding some joy and some connection and some meaning in your life. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.